Nobody tells you that raising your frequency will feel like losing everything. That's the part no one prepares you for. The spiritual world sells you a very clean image of transformation. Higher vibration is supposed to look like peace, lightness, clarity, effortless attraction. You're told that as you grow, life becomes smoother, relationships deepen, and everything starts aligning. But that's not what actually happens when real psychological change begins. Carl Jung spent his life studying people who underwent genuine inner transformation, not surface level improvement, not temporary motivation, but deep structural shifts in consciousness. And what he observed looked nothing like the polished version you've been sold. The people who moved into higher levels of awareness didn't become socially magnetic. They became selective. They didn't feel more connected to everyone. They felt disconnected from most. They didn't float through life radiating peace. They sat in familiar environments and realized they no longer belonged there. They lost the ability to participate in conversations they used to enjoy. They outgrew dynamics they once depended on. They looked around at relationships that had defined their identity and felt a distance they couldn't explain. Not because something was wrong with them, but because something fundamental had changed within them. Jung didn't use the language of frequency or vibration, but what he described maps directly onto what people are trying to articulate with those words. He spoke about individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole. He spoke about integrating the shadow, confronting unconscious patterns, and moving toward a deeper, more honest relationship with reality. And as this process unfolds, your entire way of engaging with the world begins to shift, not in ways that are immediately rewarding, but in ways that are unmistakably real. What people call vibrating at a higher frequency isn't about being better than others. It's not about superiority or spiritual status. It's about operating from a level of awareness that forces you to see what you once ignored, to feel what you once avoided, and to recognize patterns you can no longer unsee. And once that shift happens, you can't go back. Your tolerance for superficiality changes. Your relationship with conflict changes. Your need for validation, connection, and even identity itself begins to reorganize. And most of the time, it feels less like an upgrade and more like a quiet form of loss. In this video, we're going to walk through 7 specific signs that this shift has already begun in you, based on patterns Jung repeatedly observed in individuals moving toward higher consciousness. Not abstract ideas, not vague spiritual language, but real, observable changes in how you think, feel, and move through the world. And more importantly, why each of these signs often feels heavier than expected, and what it actually means about who you are becoming if you recognize yourself in them. The first sign is something most people misunderstand completely. Conflict no longer energizes you. It exhausts you. The first sign is that conflict no longer energizes you. It exhausts you in a way that feels disproportionate, almost confusing, even to yourself. There was a time when conflict had a kind of charge to it. Arguments, debates, emotional intensity, whether you admitted it or not, they created movement inside you. There was something to push against, something to prove, something to defend. Even when it was draining, it was stimulating. It made you feel engaged, involved, alive inside the interaction. But now, something has shifted. You find yourself in the middle of the same kinds of situations, the same disagreements, the same emotional escalations, and instead of feeling activated, your system shuts down. Not in fear, not in avoidance, but in recognition. It's as if something in you sees the entire pattern before it fully unfolds. You can anticipate the reactions, the misunderstandings, the escalation points. You can already see how it ends before it begins. And because of that, your body resists participating. Jung described this as the development of what could be understood as an instinct for psychological economy, a kind of internal calibration that begins to reject interactions that do not lead to genuine transformation. You start noticing that most conflict isn't actually about resolution, it's about repetition, arguments where no one is listening, only waiting for their turn to respond. Disagreements that are fueled not by a search for truth, but by the need to protect identity. Emotional reactions that are less about the present moment and more about unresolved past wounds playing themselves out again. At lower levels of awareness, these loops can continue indefinitely because the friction itself creates the illusion of progress. It feels like something is happening, so it must be meaningful. But once you've seen the pattern, you can't unsee it. And your system refuses to keep investing energy into cycles that go nowhere. This doesn't mean you've stopped caring. In many ways, you care more deeply than you ever have. But your care has shifted direction. It's no longer focused on winning the surface level interaction. It's focused on understanding what's actually underneath it. You don't just hear what someone is saying. You hear what's driving it. The insecurity behind the accusation, the fear behind the anger, the unmet need beneath the complaint. And once you recognize that, engaging only at the surface level feels almost dishonest. Because you would have to ignore what you see in order to participate the way you used to. Think about a relationship where the same argument keeps happening over and over again. On the surface, it might be about something small: chores, time, communication, habits. But underneath, it's about something much deeper. Feeling unappreciated, feeling controlled, feeling unseen. Before, you engaged at the level of the surface issue because that's what the conversation was framed around. But now, you see through it. You recognize that resolving the surface argument won't actually resolve anything. And if the other person isn't able or willing to go deeper into the real issue, you're left in a position where participation feels pointless. So you withdraw, not as a strategy, but as a consequence of clarity. And this is where the misunderstanding begins. From the outside, your withdrawal looks like indifference. It looks like you don't care enough to engage. It looks like you've become passive or detached. But internally, the reality is the opposite. You care so much about what's real that you can no longer invest yourself in what isn't. The exhaustion you feel isn't from conflict itself. It's from the misalignment between what's being expressed and what's actually true. And your system has reached a point where it refuses to carry that misalignment. The second sign is that you've become almost impossible to manipulate. And this has likely cost you more than you expected. Jung observed that as individuals integrate their shadow, meaning they become aware of their own unconscious patterns, their own capacity for fear, control, and self-deception, they develop a kind of psychological transparency. They begin to see through the mechanisms that once influenced them. Guilt no longer lands the same way, because you can distinguish between genuine emotional expression and subtle control. You can feel when someone is trying to make you responsible for their internal state rather than communicating honestly about it. Flattery loses its effect because you can sense the intention behind it. Compliments that once felt validating now feel loaded, as if they're trying to guide your behavior rather than simply reflect appreciation. Fear-based pressure stops working because you've already confronted aspects of yourself that were more destabilizing than external threats. When you faced your own shadow, your own insecurity, your own uncertainty, there's very little someone else can use against you that you haven't already encountered internally. This doesn't make you guarded. It makes you aware, and awareness changes the entire dynamic. What used to operate unconsciously in your relationships now becomes visible. You start recognizing patterns that were always there, but that you previously participated in without questioning. The friend who maintains closeness through obligation rather than genuine connection. the family dynamic that relies on guilt to keep roles intact, the relationship that functions through cycles of reward and withdrawal rather than consistent presence. Once you see these patterns, you can't fully participate in them the same way again. And this is where the cost becomes real, because these dynamics don't just disappear quietly. They react. When the mechanisms that used to work on you stop working, the people who relied on those mechanisms often don't understand what changed. From their perspective, you've become difficult, distant, uncooperative. They may try to intensify the same strategies, more guilt, more pressure, more emotional leverage. And when that fails, the relationship begins to destabilize, not because you're rejecting them, but because the structure that held the relationship together is no longer functional. And this creates a very specific kind of loss. It's not just losing a person. It's realizing that what you thought the relationship wasn't actually what it appeared to be. That it depended on a version of you that was less aware, more compliant, more willing to adapt to maintain connection. And as that version of you dissolves, the relationship either evolves or it ends. Jung was very clear about this. Transformation doesn't just change how you see yourself. It reveals the true nature of everything around you. And that revelation is not always comforting. The third sign is that solitude becomes a necessity, not a preference. You don't seek it to escape. You need it to function. Jung referred to this as a form of deliberate withdrawal, a process where the psyche requires periods of isolation in order to integrate what it is processing. As your awareness expands, your sensitivity to your environment increases. You don't just experience interactions at the surface level anymore. You perceive layers. You notice the difference between what people say and what they mean. You feel the emotional undercurrents in conversations. You pick up on tension, projection, contradiction, even when it's subtle. And all of this information doesn't just pass through you, it stays. Your mind continues to process it long after the interaction ends. Your system tries to make sense of it, to organize it, to integrate it into a coherent understanding, which means your cognitive and emotional load is significantly higher than it used to be. Where someone else can move from one interaction to the next without needing much recovery, your system requires space to decompress. Silence becomes functional, not symbolic. You're not withdrawing because you don't want connection. You're withdrawing because your system needs to recalibrate. But in a culture that equates constant social engagement with health, this need is often misunderstood. People interpret your solitude as isolation, your quietness as withdrawal, your absence as disconnection. They may assume something is wrong, that you're struggling, avoiding, or shutting down. And you try to explain that you're not feeling empty. You're actually trying to maintain balance. But that explanation rarely translates because most people don't experience the level of internal processing that makes solitude necessary. Jung observed that individuals who honored this need didn't become less connected. They became more intentional, because when they did engage, they weren't doing it from depletion. They were present fully, not divided between external interaction and internal overload. And over time, this changes not just how often you connect, but how deeply. You begin to prefer fewer interactions that are meaningful over frequent interactions that feel fragmented. And that shift, while subtle, marks a significant movement in consciousness, because your system is no longer optimized for quantity. It's optimized for truth. The fourth sign is one that often goes unnoticed at first because it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like loss. You've lost interest in being right. There was a time when being right mattered more than you realized. Not just intellectually, but psychologically. It gave you a sense of stability. If you could prove your point, defend your position, demonstrate that your perspective was correct, It reinforced something deeper, your sense of identity, your sense of certainty, your sense of control over how you were perceived. But something has shifted. Now, you find yourself in conversations where you could correct someone, where you could dismantle an argument, where you could clearly demonstrate that your understanding is more accurate and you don't. Not because you can't, but because something in you no longer needs to. Jung explored this transition as part of what he described as psychological humility, not the kind that performs modesty, but the kind that emerges when the ego has been confronted enough times to recognize its own limitations. You begin to see that the need to be right is often less about truth and more about defense. Defense against uncertainty, defense against feeling unseen, defense against the possibility that your perspective might be incomplete. And once you see that mechanism within yourself, you start seeing it everywhere. Arguments that appear to be about facts are actually about identity. Debates that appear to be about ideas are actually about emotional investment. People are not just protecting their opinions, they're protecting the structure of how they understand themselves. And once you recognize that, something changes in how you engage. You stop trying to win, not because truth doesn't matter, but because you realize that forcing truth into a space that isn't ready to receive it doesn't create understanding. It creates resistance. So instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of correcting, you listen. Instead of asserting, you allow. And from the outside, this can look like passivity. It can look like you've become less sharp, less engaged, less invested. But internally, the opposite is happening. You've moved from needing certainty to being able to hold complexity. You can sit with two opposing ideas without needing to collapse one of them. You can recognize that multiple perspectives can contain partial truths. You can acknowledge that your own understanding is evolving without feeling threatened by that. And that shift changes everything. Because most social structures are built on shared certainty. People bond over agreement. Groups form around common beliefs. Identity is reinforced through alignment. But when you no longer need that alignment to feel stable, you start drifting out of those structures, not intentionally, but inevitably, because you're no longer operating from the same psychological need. And that creates distance, not hostility, not rejection, just distance, because you're no longer playing the same game. The fifth sign is that you begin to feel dishonesty in your body before your mind can explain it. This goes beyond intuition in the casual sense. It becomes somatic. Jung observed that individuals who had engaged deeply with their own shadow, who had confronted their own capacity for self-deception, for performance, for distortion, developed a heightened sensitivity to those same patterns in others, not as a judgment, but as a direct perception. Someone speaks, and before you have time to analyze their words, your body reacts. A tightening in your chest, a subtle discomfort in your stomach, a sense of internal resistance that doesn't match the surface of the conversation. It's not always dramatic. Often it's quiet, but it's consistent. And over time, you begin to trust it. You start noticing that this response isn't random. It appears in specific conditions when there is a gap between what is being presented and what is actually true. It happens in conversations where people are performing rather than expressing. In environments where agreement is expected but not genuine. In interactions where emotion is being displayed but not actually felt. And the more you've confronted your own patterns, the more precise this sensitivity becomes. Because you're no longer projecting blindly. You've seen those mechanisms in yourself. You've recognized when you were saying one thing while feeling another. When you were presenting a version of yourself that wasn't fully aligned with your internal reality. And that self-recognition calibrates your perception. It tunes your system to detect that same misalignment externally, which creates a very specific challenge. Because most social interaction contains some degree of performance. Not necessarily deception in a malicious sense, but adaptation, politeness, filtering, the subtle shaping of expression to fit context. And while you understand why this exists, you've participated in it, you begin to lose the ability to fully engage with it. You can feel the difference too clearly. You can sense when a conversation is operating at the surface level, when authenticity is being bypassed in favor of comfort. And staying in that space for too long becomes uncomfortable, not emotionally, physically. Your system begins to resist prolonged exposure to inauthenticity. And again, this is often misunderstood. People may interpret your withdrawal as judgment, as if you're rejecting them. But the reality is more neutral. You're not reacting to them. You're responding to the misalignment your system can no longer ignore. And because you can't unsee it, you can't fully participate in it anymore. The sixth sign is that your emotional responses become slower, deeper, and less reactive. This is one of the most misinterpreted shifts, because from the outside, it can look like you've become distant. People who knew you before may remember someone who reacted quickly, someone who expressed emotion immediately, someone who matched the intensity of the moment without hesitation. And now, they see something different. You pause, you take time. You don't immediately mirror the emotional energy in the room, and they interpret that as disconnection. But what's actually happening is far more precise. Jung described this as the emergence of the observing consciousness, a part of the psyche that can witness emotional experience without being consumed by it. You still feel, in many ways, you feel more deeply than before, but there is now space between what you feel and how you respond, a gap. And in that gap, awareness operates. Instead of being pulled into immediate reaction, you can observe what is happening internally. You can recognize the emotional trigger, trace it to its source, and decide whether it belongs to the present moment or to something unresolved from the past. And that changes the quality of your response. You're no longer reacting automatically. You're responding intentionally, which means your reactions may not match expectations. Someone expresses anger, and instead of responding with equal intensity, you remain steady. Someone delivers news that would have overwhelmed you before, and you receive it with calm. Someone attempts to provoke you, and you don't engage. From the outside, this can look like indifference, but internally, it's regulation. Your nervous system has developed the capacity to hold emotional intensity without being destabilized by it. You're not suppressing emotion. You are containing it, processing it, allowing it to move through without immediately externalizing it. And this creates a different kind of presence, one that isn't driven by reactivity, but by awareness. Jung emphasized that this shift is essential for psychological maturity, because without it, most responses are not actually responses to the present, they are reactions to past conditioning. When you develop the ability to pause, you create the possibility of responding to reality as it is, rather than as it has been conditioned in you. And that single shift alters every interaction, because you are no longer operating from automatic patterns. You're operating from choice. The seventh sign is the most subtle and the most isolating. You stop needing external validation to know what is true. There was a time when you looked outside yourself for confirmation. You checked your perceptions against others. You sought agreement before trusting your conclusions. You relied on external feedback to stabilize your internal understanding. But something has changed. Now, you perceive something and you know, not with arrogance, not with rigidity, but with a quiet certainty that doesn't require reinforcement. Jung described this as the development of an internal locus of authority. the point at which the center of validation shifts from external consensus to internal coherence. You begin to trust your direct experience, not blindly, but because you've tested it, you've questioned yourself, you've confronted your biases, you've examined your projections, and through that process, you've refined your perception. So when something registers as true within you, you don't immediately seek agreement. You observe it, you hold it, you allow it to stand on its own. And this is liberating. But it comes with a cost, because validation is not just about confirmation, it's about shared reality. When others agree with you, it creates a sense of alignment, a feeling that you're not alone in what you're seeing. When you no longer depend on that agreement, you also lose that reassurance. You become the primary witness to your own experience. And when your perception differs from the people around you, that can feel isolating. You see it in relationships. Someone tells you everything is fine, and something in you knows it isn't. Before, you might have questioned yourself. Now, you don't. You recognize the discrepancy, and you trust your perception of it. You see it in group dynamics. A decision is made, and everyone supports it, but you sense the underlying flaw. And even if you don't voice it, you feel it in your own internal shifts, changes that are invisible to others, but undeniable to you. Growth that doesn't need to be recognized externally to be real. Jung was clear about this. This internal authority is not arrogance. It's the result of sustained inner work, of confronting yourself honestly enough that your perception becomes reliable. But it changes how you relate to others, because many relationships are built on mutual validation, on shared agreement, on reinforcing each other's perspectives. And when you no longer need that reinforcement, the dynamic shifts. Others may feel dismissed, unnecessary, disconnected, not because you're rejecting them, but because you're no longer depending on them in the same way. And that can create distance, even when nothing explicit has changed. If you recognize these patterns in yourself, you're not imagining it. Something has shifted, and it's deeper than behavior. It's structural. It's the way your awareness organizes reality. And once that structure changes, everything else follows. If you recognize yourself in these 7 signs, the most important thing to understand is this: nothing about what you're experiencing is accidental. And more importantly, nothing about it means something is wrong with you. What you're going through is not dysfunction, it's reorganization. Carl Jung never described this process as comfortable. He didn't frame it as a smooth ascent into peace or clarity. He described it as a confrontation, a gradual dismantling of unconscious patterns, false identities, inherited beliefs, and relational dynamics that were never truly aligned with who you are. And when those structures begin to dissolve, it doesn't feel like expansion. It feels like loss. You lose the version of yourself that could participate in things without questioning them. You lose the ease of fitting into environments that now feel misaligned. You lose relationships that depended on your unawareness to function. And for a period of time, you exist in between, no longer who you were, not yet fully integrated into who you're becoming. That space is where most people start to doubt themselves. They assume the discomfort means they've gone in the wrong direction, that the isolation is a sign they need to go back, that the friction they feel with their environment is something they should fix by adjusting themselves again. But Jung's work points in the opposite direction. He saw this phase as evidence that something is working, that the psyche is reorganizing around truth rather than adaptation, that you are moving toward wholeness not by adding something new, but by removing what was never authentic to begin with. The loneliness you feel is real. The grief is real. The sense of disconnection is real. But they are not permanent states. They are transitional conditions, because as your awareness stabilizes, something else begins to happen quietly, almost imperceptibly, at first. You start to recognize people who operate from a similar depth, not through effort, not through searching, but through resonance. The same way you've become sensitive to inauthenticity, you become sensitive to alignment. You can feel when someone is real, when they're not performing, when they've done their own inner work, and those connections, while rare, are fundamentally different from anything that came before. They don't require you to shrink. They don't depend on unconscious patterns. They don't rely on constant validation to sustain themselves. They are built on recognition, and that changes everything. Jung believed that the individuals who were willing to endure this phase, the uncertainty, the isolation, the internal confrontation, were the ones who eventually reached a way of living that was not just functional, but true, not easier, not free from challenge, but aligned. And at a certain point in this process, something shifts in your priorities. Comfort stops being the primary goal. Belonging, in its old form, loses its grip. And truth, no matter how inconvenient, how isolating, how demanding it is, becomes non-negotiable. That is the real meaning behind what people call a higher frequency. Not elevation above others, but alignment within yourself. And if you're here, if you've seen these patterns unfolding in your own life, then you're already in that process, even if it doesn't feel like progress, even if it feels like everything is falling apart. Because sometimes what feels like falling apart is actually the first moment things are coming together in the way they were always meant to.